Chapter 1. The Birth of a Queen. In a far-off time, in a land full of pyramids and sphinxes, a baby girl was born. Her name was Cleopatra. She was not just any girl, she was a princess. She was born in a royal family in Egypt, a family known as the Ptolemaic dynasty. This family was not originally from Egypt, but from Greece. They had been ruling Egypt for many years. Cleopatra's father was the king of Egypt. His name was Ptolemy XII. Her mother was possibly Cleopatra V Tryphena, the queen. Cleopatra had several brothers and sisters. They lived in a big palace in Alexandria, the capital city of Egypt. Alexandria was a beautiful city. It had a famous library with many books and a tall lighthouse that people could see from far away. Cleopatra grew up seeing these wonders every day. She was a princess, but she was also a student. She learned many things in the palace, like how to read and write. The Ptolemaic family believed in many gods and goddesses, just like all the other people in Egypt. Cleopatra, like everyone else, followed these traditions. She visited the grand temples and made offerings to the gods and goddesses. As a young girl, she was fascinated by the stories and rituals. In the Ptolemaic dynasty, the oldest daughter often became the queen. So, from a young age, Cleopatra knew she would one day become queen. But she was also a child, and she liked to play and laugh, just like other children. Cleopatra's early years were not just about learning and playing. They were also about understanding what it meant to be a queen. She watched her father rule Egypt and learned from him. She saw how he made decisions and how he dealt with problems. She also learned about the people of Egypt. She understood that she would one day rule them, and she wanted to be a good queen for them. She learned their language and customs. She wanted to be a queen that the people of Egypt could love and respect. This was the royal beginning of Cleopatra, a girl born to be queen. Her early years in Egypt were full of learning, playing, and preparing for the day when she would wear the crown. It was a time of growing and becoming the person she needed to be. But the story of Cleopatra was just starting. There were many more chapters to be written in the life of this future queen. Growing up in the royal palace of Alexandria, Cleopatra's life was different from most girls. The palace was not just a home. It was a place of learning, a place of work, and a place of power. It was a busy and bustling place, full of people and activities. There were servants, soldiers, and scholars. There were also her family members, her father, the king, her brothers, and her sisters. Life in the palace was full of lessons. Cleopatra had tutors, people who taught her many things. She learned how to read and write in Greek, the language of her family. But she also learned Egyptian, the language of the people she would one day rule. This was unusual because most of the Ptolemies didn't bother to learn the Egyptian language. But Cleopatra was different. She wanted to understand and connect with her future subjects. Cleopatra didn't just learn languages. She also learned about history, religion, mathematics, and science. She was particularly interested in Egypt's gods and goddesses. She loved hearing the stories about them and learning about the rituals to honor them. This knowledge would be important in the future when she would take on the role of a living goddess as a queen. Living in the palace also meant learning about ruling a kingdom. She watched her father, King Ptolemy XII, closely. She saw how he made decisions, how he dealt with the people around him, and how he handled problems. She learned about politics, about making alliances, and about the challenges of being a ruler. Despite the serious lessons and the weight of her future responsibilities, Cleopatra was still a child, and she had time for fun too. She played games with her brothers and sisters in the palace gardens. They would run and laugh in the warm Egyptian sun. Sometimes, they would sail little boats on the palace's pool, pretending to be famous sailors exploring the Nile. Cleopatra's upbringing in the palace was not ordinary. It was full of serious learning and royal responsibilities, but also full of joy and play. Every day was a step towards becoming the queen she was born to be. These were the days of Cleopatra's youth, days of learning and growing, days of joy and play. Each day was a step closer to the throne, a step closer to her destiny. Her time as a princess in the palace was shaping her, preparing her for the great queen she was destined to become. But the journey was far from over. There were still many lessons to be learned, many challenges to be faced. The story of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, was only just beginning. As Cleopatra grew older, she knew that one day she would become queen. She was the oldest daughter, and that was the custom in her family. But the path to the throne was not always easy or simple. There were many challenges and changes that Cleopatra had to face. When Cleopatra was still a young girl, her father, King Ptolemy XII, had problems with the people of Egypt. They were not happy with him. They thought he was not a good king. Because of this, he had to leave Egypt for a while. He went to Rome, a powerful city far away from Egypt, to ask for help. While her father was away, Cleopatra's older sister, Berenice, became queen. But when King Ptolemy XII returned with Roman soldiers, there was a fight. Berenice and many other people were killed. Cleopatra saw all this. It was a hard time for her. A few years later, when Cleopatra was 18, her father, the king, died. It was a sad time. But it was also the time for Cleopatra to become queen. But she was not alone. She became queen with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. He was only 10 years old. This was also a tradition in their family. A queen would always rule with a king, even if the king was her younger brother. Becoming queen was not easy for Cleopatra. She was young, and there were many problems in Egypt. There was not enough food for the people. There were also people who did not want her to be queen. They wanted her younger brother to rule alone. But Cleopatra was strong and smart. She used her knowledge and her skills to make decisions. She listened to the people and tried to solve the problems. She showed everyone that she could be a good queen. The path to power was not easy, but Cleopatra walked it with courage and determination. She faced challenges and changes. She faced sadness and opposition. But through it all, she remained focused on her goal. She was ready to be the queen that Egypt needed. This was the beginning of Cleopatra's reign, the start of her time as queen. It was a time of change and challenge. But Cleopatra was ready. She had learned from her father. She had learned from her tutors. She had learned from the palace. Now it was time to use that knowledge to be the queen she was born to be. The story of Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, was truly underway. Chapter 2. Cleopatra's Rule. Cleopatra was now queen of Egypt. She was young, only 18 years old. She ruled with her brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was even younger. He was just a boy. But despite her youth, Cleopatra was ready to be queen. She had prepared for this all her life. Her first days as queen were difficult. Egypt was facing many problems. There was not enough food. The people were not happy. Some people did not want a young girl as their queen. They wanted her brother to rule alone. Cleopatra had to show them that she could be a good queen. Cleopatra was a clever queen. She used her knowledge and skills to solve problems. She listened to the people of Egypt. She tried to make sure there was enough food for everyone. She worked hard every day. It was not easy, but Cleopatra was determined. Despite the challenges, Cleopatra also had successes. She was the first of her family to learn the Egyptian language. This made the people of Egypt happy. They saw that their queen cared about them and their culture. Cleopatra also followed the Egyptian tradition of presenting herself as a goddess. She chose to be identified with Isis, the goddess of magic, motherhood, and healing. This also made the people love her more. Cleopatra's early days as queen were not just about work. She also had some fun times. She lived in a beautiful palace. She wore beautiful clothes. She attended grand feasts. She met with important people from other countries. She even had a ship with purple sails. Being a young queen was not easy, but Cleopatra was not afraid. She faced the challenges with courage. She celebrated the successes with joy. She learned from each day and became a better queen. She was becoming the queen she wanted to be, the queen Egypt needed. These were the early days of Cleopatra's rule, the start of her journey as queen. It was a time of learning and growing. It was a time of struggle and success. And through it all, Cleopatra showed her strength and wisdom. She was proving to everyone that she was not just a young queen, but a great queen. The story of Cleopatra's rule was just beginning. Being a queen was not just about living in a palace and wearing beautiful clothes. It was also about politics and power. Cleopatra knew this very well. She knew that to be a good queen, she had to be a good leader. And to be a good leader, she had to understand politics. Politics is about making decisions for the country. It's about solving problems and making sure the people are happy. It's also about dealing with other countries. Cleopatra was very good at politics. She was smart, and she understood how to make good decisions. One of the biggest problems Cleopatra faced was with her brother, Ptolemy XIII. He was young, but he was also the king. There were people who wanted him to rule alone. They did not like Cleopatra. They made it hard for her to be queen. But Cleopatra did not give up. She fought for her place on the throne. Cleopatra also had to deal with other countries. Egypt was not alone in the world. There were many powerful countries nearby. One of these was Rome. Rome was very strong and very important. Cleopatra knew that it was good for Egypt to be friends with Rome. To make this friendship stronger, Cleopatra met with Julius Caesar, the leader of Rome. She was very brave and very clever. She knew that Caesar could help her keep her throne. So she went to him, not as a queen asking for help, but as a queen offering friendship. This meeting was a big success. Caesar and Cleopatra became friends. He helped her fight against the people who did not want her to be queen. With Caesar's help, Cleopatra became the sole ruler of Egypt. These were the early days of Cleopatra's rule, the days of politics and power. It was a time of challenges and changes. It was a time of friendships and fights. But through it all, Cleopatra showed her strength and wisdom. She proved that she was not just a queen, but a great leader. The story of Cleopatra's rule was becoming even more exciting. As queen, Cleopatra knew that it was important to connect with her people. She wanted to be more than just a ruler. She wanted to be an icon, a symbol of Egypt. She wanted to be a queen that the people could love and respect. One of the ways Cleopatra connected with her people was by learning their language. Most of the Ptolemaic rulers before her did not speak Egyptian. They spoke Greek. But Cleopatra was different. She learned Egyptian and used it to speak to her people. This made her people feel special. They saw that their queen cared about them and their language. Cleopatra also respected the Egyptian religion. She often appeared as the goddess Isis in public ceremonies. Isis was a very important goddess in Egypt. She was the goddess of motherhood, magic, and healing. By presenting herself as Isis, Cleopatra showed her people that she was not just their queen, but also their goddess. This made her people love and respect her even more. But Cleopatra did not stop there. She also built many temples and monuments. These buildings were not just beautiful. They were also symbols of Cleopatra's power and generosity. They reminded the people of Egypt that their queen was strong and kind. Cleopatra also made sure that she was seen by her people. She took part in many public events. She led religious ceremonies. She visited different parts of Egypt. Everywhere she went, she was met with cheers and smiles. The people of Egypt loved their queen. Cleopatra's efforts were successful. She became an icon of Egypt. She was not just a queen. She was a symbol of Egyptian power, culture, and religion. She was a symbol of Egyptian pride. These were the days of Cleopatra's rule, the days when she became an icon of Egypt. She connected with her people. She respected their culture. She showed them love and kindness, and in return, they gave her their love and respect. The story of Cleopatra, the queen who became an icon, was truly a story to remember. Chapter 3. The Roman Connection. The story of Cleopatra's life took an exciting turn when she met a man named Julius Caesar. Caesar was not just any man. He was a powerful leader from Rome. Cleopatra knew that meeting him could change her life and the future of Egypt. The meeting with Caesar was not easy for Cleopatra. At the time, her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, was trying to take her throne. He did not want her to be queen. He made it hard for her to meet Caesar, but Cleopatra was not afraid. She was brave and clever. To meet Caesar, Cleopatra came up with a plan. She had herself wrapped in a beautiful carpet. Then she was carried into Caesar's room. When the carpet was unrolled, there was Cleopatra. She looked beautiful and powerful. Caesar was surprised and impressed. From that moment, Cleopatra and Caesar became friends. They spent a lot of time together. They talked about many things. They talked about Egypt and Rome. They talked about power and politics. They also talked about dreams and hopes. Cleopatra was smart. She knew that being friends with Caesar could help her. It could help her keep her throne. It could also help Egypt be friends with Rome. So she worked hard to make their friendship strong. But their friendship was not just about power and politics. It was also about love. Cleopatra and Caesar fell in love. They had a son together. His name was Caesarion, which means Little Caesar. The meeting with Caesar changed Cleopatra's life. It made her stronger. It gave her more power. It also gave her a son. But most importantly, it gave her a friend and a lover. The story of Cleopatra and Caesar is a story of courage and cleverness. It's a story of power and politics, but it's also a story of love and friendship. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but also a woman with dreams and hopes, a woman who knew how to love and be loved. After Cleopatra and Julius Caesar met, they formed a strong alliance. An alliance is like a friendship between two countries. It's a promise to help each other. Cleopatra and Caesar's alliance was not just between two people, but between two powerful countries, Egypt and Rome. This alliance was very important for Cleopatra. It helped her keep her throne. With Caesar's support, she became the sole ruler of Egypt. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII, was no longer a problem. She was now the queen, and she was stronger than ever. The alliance was also important for Caesar. It gave him control over Egypt, which was a rich and powerful country. Egypt had a lot of wheat, which Rome needed. Egypt was also a key location for trade. With control over Egypt, Caesar became even more powerful in Rome. But the alliance between Cleopatra and Caesar was not just about power. It was also about family. Cleopatra and Caesar had a son together. His name was Caesarion, which means Little Caesar. Caesarion was the only son of Caesar. He was also the heir to Cleopatra's throne. This made the alliance between Cleopatra and Caesar even stronger. Having a son was a big deal for Cleopatra. It meant that her family, the Ptolemaic dynasty, would continue. It meant that her son would one day be the king of Egypt. It was a sign of her power and success. The alliance between Cleopatra and Caesar was powerful. It changed the course of history. It made Cleopatra stronger. It made Egypt more important. It also led to the birth of a new king. But most importantly, it showed the world that Cleopatra was a smart and powerful queen. She was not just a ruler, but also a leader, a mother, and a friend. The story of Cleopatra and Caesar's alliance is a story of power and politics. It's a story of family and friendship. But it's also a story of love and hope. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but also a woman who knew how to use her power and intelligence for the good of her country and her family. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar's alliance was strong and powerful. They were friends, lovers, and parents to their son, Caesarion. But this happy time in Cleopatra's life took a sudden, tragic turn. Julius Caesar was assassinated. Caesar was killed in Rome by some of his own people. They were afraid that Caesar was becoming too powerful. They did not want him to be king. So they made a plan to kill him. And they did. Caesar's death was a shock to everyone, especially Cleopatra. Cleopatra was in Rome when Caesar was killed. She was heartbroken. She lost her friend, her lover, and the father of her son. But she was also a queen, and she knew she had to be strong. She had to think about her son and her country. After Caesar's death, Cleopatra went back to Egypt. She made her son, Caesarion, her co-ruler. This meant that Caesarion was now the king of Egypt, together with Cleopatra. She did this to keep her throne and to protect her son. She wanted to make sure that Caesarion would be safe and that he would one day be the sole ruler of Egypt. Caesar's death changed many things for Cleopatra. It made her life harder. She had to rule without Caesar's support. She had to protect her son. She also had to deal with Rome, which was now in chaos. But despite these challenges, Cleopatra did not give up. She was a strong queen. She was ready to face any challenge. The death of Caesar was a tragic event in Cleopatra's life. It was a time of loss and sadness, but it was also a time of strength and determination. It was a time when Cleopatra showed the world that she was not just a queen, but a powerful and courageous leader. The story of Cleopatra and Caesar's death is a story of loss and love. It's a story of strength and survival, but it's also a story of a queen's courage and determination. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but a woman who knew how to face challenges with strength and grace. Chapter 4. Mark Antony and Cleopatra. After Julius Caesar's death, Cleopatra was alone. She had lost her friend, her lover, and her ally. But she was a strong queen. She knew she had to find a new ally to help her keep her throne and protect her son. This is when she met Mark Antony. Mark Antony was a Roman leader. He was a friend of Julius Caesar. After Caesar's death, Antony became one of the most powerful men in Rome. Cleopatra knew that having Antony as an ally could be good for her and Egypt. Just like with Caesar, Cleopatra met Antony in a very special way. She sailed to Tarsus, a city in modern-day Turkey, on a beautiful ship. The ship was decorated with gold and silver. It was filled with beautiful flowers and sweet smells. Cleopatra herself was dressed like the goddess Venus. She wanted to impress Antony, and she did. Antony was amazed by Cleopatra. He was impressed by her beauty, her intelligence, and her confidence. He was also impressed by her kindness. Cleopatra invited Antony to join her on her ship. She treated him with respect and generosity. Antony was touched by Cleopatra's kindness. He started to like her. Cleopatra and Antony became friends. They spent a lot of time together. They talked about many things. They talked about Egypt and Rome. They talked about power and politics. They also talked about dreams and hopes. Just like with Caesar, Cleopatra's friendship with Antony was not just about power and politics. It was also about love. Cleopatra and Antony fell in love. They had 3 children together. Their names were Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene II, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. Meeting Antony was good for Cleopatra. It gave her a new ally. It gave her more power. It also gave her love and happiness. But most importantly, it gave her hope. It gave her hope that she could keep her throne, protect her son, and help Egypt. The story of Cleopatra and Antony is a story of friendship and love. It's a story of power and politics. But it's also a story of hope and dreams. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but also a woman who knew how to love, dream, and hope for a better future. After Cleopatra and Mark Antony fell in love, they formed a powerful alliance. They became more than friends. They became partners. They shared power. They ruled together. Antony spent a lot of time in Egypt. He loved Cleopatra. He loved their children. He also loved the Egyptian way of life. He started to act like an Egyptian. He wore Egyptian clothes. He followed Egyptian customs. The people of Egypt liked Antony. They saw him as one of them. Cleopatra and Antony also had children together. They had 2 sons and a daughter. Their names were Alexander Helios, Ptolemy Philadelphus, and Cleopatra Selene II. The children were a sign of Cleopatra and Antony's love. They were also a sign of their shared power. Antony was not just a father to Cleopatra's children. He was also a ruler. He ruled Egypt together with Cleopatra. He helped Cleopatra make important decisions. He helped her keep her throne. He also helped her protect her son, Khazarian, who was the heir to Cleopatra's throne. Cleopatra and Antony's shared rule was good for Egypt. It brought peace and stability. It also brought prosperity. Egypt became richer. The people of Egypt became happier. They loved Cleopatra and Antony. They saw them as their king and queen. The shared rule of Cleopatra and Antony was not just about power. It was also about love and family. It was about working together for a common goal. It was about creating a better future for their children and their country. The story of Cleopatra and Antony's shared rule is a story of power and politics. It's a story of love and family. But it's also a story of teamwork and cooperation. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but also a partner, a mother, and a leader. She knew how to share power. She knew how to work together for the good of her family and her country. One of the most important events during the shared rule of Cleopatra and Mark Antony was the donations of Alexandria. This was a special ceremony where Antony gave Cleopatra and their children gifts of lands and titles. It was a grand event, and it changed the course of history. The donations of Alexandria took place in 34 BC. It was held in Alexandria, the capital of Egypt. It was a big celebration. There was music, dancing, and feasting. The people of Egypt were excited. They were happy for their queen and her children. During the ceremony, Antony stood on a golden platform. He was dressed in the robes of an Egyptian pharaoh. Beside him was Cleopatra, dressed as the goddess Isis. Their children were also there, looking beautiful and royal. Antony spoke to the crowd. He announced that he was giving lands to Cleopatra and their children. These lands were in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. They included places like Cyprus, parts of Syria, and parts of Lebanon. These lands were rich and fertile. They were good for farming and trade. Antony also gave titles to Cleopatra and their children. He declared Cleopatra the Queen of Kings. He declared their son, Alexander Helios, as the king of Armenia, Media, and Parthia. Their daughter, Cleopatra Selene, was named Queen of Cyrenaica and Libya. Their youngest son, Ptolemy Philadelphus, was named King of Syria and Asia Minor. The donations of Alexandria was a big event. It made Cleopatra and her children even more powerful. It showed the world that Antony was not just a Roman leader, but also an Egyptian pharaoh. It showed that Cleopatra was not just a queen, but also a queen of kings. The story of the donations of Alexandria is a story of power and generosity. It's a story of love and family. But it's also a story of a queen's rise to even greater power. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but a woman who knew how to rule with strength, wisdom, and grace. Chapter 5. The Battle of Actium. While Cleopatra and Mark Antony were ruling Egypt together, not everyone was happy. There was a problem in Rome. The problem was Octavian. Octavian was Julius Caesar's adopted son. After Caesar's death, Octavian became one of the leaders of Rome. But he wanted to be the sole ruler. He saw Antony as a threat. Octavian was not happy with Antony. He was not happy that Antony was living in Egypt. He was not happy that Antony was ruling with Cleopatra. He was not happy that Antony was acting like an Egyptian. Most of all, he was not happy about the donations of Alexandria. The donations of Alexandria was a big event. It made Cleopatra and Antony very powerful. But in Rome, people saw it differently. They saw it as Antony giving away Roman lands to a foreign queen. They saw it as Antony being under Cleopatra's control. This made Octavian and the people of Rome angry. Octavian started to spread rumors about Antony. He said that Antony was not a true Roman. He said that Antony was planning to move the capital of Rome to Egypt. He said that Antony wanted to make Khazarian, not Octavian, the heir to Caesar. These rumors made the people of Rome more angry at Antony. The tension between Antony and Octavian grew. They argued. They fought. Their friendship turned into a rivalry. This rivalry was not just about power. It was about control. It was about the future of Rome. It was also about the future of Egypt. As the tension grew, war became inevitable. Octavian declared war on Antony and Cleopatra. This was the start of the Battle of Actium. The story of the rising tensions between Antony and Octavian is a story of power and rivalry. It's a story of politics and war. But it's also a story of a queen's fight for her kingdom. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but a woman who knew how to stand up for herself and her country. The Battle of Actium was a battle that changed the course of history. It was a battle between Mark Antony and Cleopatra on one side, and Octavian on the other. It was a battle for power. It was a battle for control. It was a battle for the future of Rome and Egypt. The battle took place on September 2, 31 BC. It happened near Actium, a place in Greece. Antony and Cleopatra had a big fleet of ships. They had soldiers from Egypt and other eastern lands. Octavian also had a big fleet of ships. He had soldiers from Rome and other western lands. The battle started early in the morning. Antony's ships sailed towards Octavian's ships. The soldiers fought with swords and arrows. The air was filled with noise and smoke. It was a fierce and bloody battle. But something unexpected happened. Cleopatra's ship started to leave the battle. Antony saw this and followed her. This was a big mistake. Without their leaders, Antony's soldiers lost hope. They stopped fighting. Octavian's soldiers took advantage of this. They attacked harder. They won the battle. The Battle of Actium was a defeat for Antony and Cleopatra. It was a victory for Octavian. It made Octavian the sole ruler of Rome. It also weakened the power of Cleopatra. She lost her ally. She lost her fleet. She lost her hope. The Battle of Actium was a turning point in history. It marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. It marked the end of the Roman Republic. It marked the beginning of the Roman Empire. The story of the Battle of Actium is a story of war and defeat. It's a story of mistakes and consequences, but it's also a story of a queen's bravery and determination. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but a woman who knew how to fight for what she believed in. After the Battle of Actium, things changed a lot for Antony and Cleopatra. They had lost the battle. They had lost many soldiers. They had lost many ships. But most importantly, they had lost their power. Antony and Cleopatra returned to Egypt. They were sad. They were worried. They knew that Octavian would come after them. They knew that they could not win against him. In Egypt, things were not easy. The people were scared. The economy was weak. Food was scarce. Antony and Cleopatra tried to keep things under control, but it was hard. The defeat at Actium had weakened their rule. Meanwhile, Octavian was getting stronger. He was now the sole ruler of Rome. He had a strong army. He had a lot of support. He was ready to take over Egypt. In 30 BC, Octavian attacked Egypt. Antony tried to fight back. But it was too late. Octavian's forces were too strong. Antony realized that he could not win. He was told that Cleopatra had died. In his sadness, he took his own life. When Cleopatra heard about Antony's death, she was heartbroken. She was also scared. She did not want to be captured by Octavian. She did not want to be paraded in Rome as a prisoner. So she made a plan. She allowed herself to be bitten by a poisonous snake and asked. She died from the snake's venom. The death of Antony and Cleopatra marked the end of an era. It marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. It marked the end of independent Egypt. Egypt became a province of Rome. Octavian became the first emperor of Rome. He changed his name to Augustus. The aftermath of the Battle of Actium is a story of loss and tragedy. It's a story of the end of a dynasty, but it's also a story of a queen's courage and dignity. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but a woman who knew how to face her fate with bravery and grace. Chapter 6. The end of an era. After the defeat at the Battle of Actium, Mark Antony's life took a tragic turn. He returned to Egypt, a changed man. He was no longer the strong, confident Roman general. He was no longer the powerful co-ruler of Egypt. He was a man filled with sadness and regret. Antony tried to keep his spirits up. He tried to maintain his rule in Egypt, but it was clear that things were not the same. His power was weakened. His people were scared. His enemy, Octavian, was getting stronger. Antony knew that Octavian would come for him. He knew that he could not win against Octavian. He was not as strong as he used to be. He did not have as many soldiers. He did not have as many allies. In 30 BC, Octavian attacked Egypt. Antony was ready to fight back. But he soon realized that it was a losing battle. Octavian's forces were too strong. Antony's forces were too weak. The end was near. One day, Antony received the news that Cleopatra had died. He was devastated. He loved Cleopatra. He had shared his life with her. He had ruled Egypt with her. He could not imagine life without her. In his grief, Antony made a drastic decision. He decided to take his own life. He fell on his sword. His last thoughts were of Cleopatra, the woman he loved, the woman he had lost. Antony's end was tragic. He died a defeated man. He died a heartbroken man. But he also died a man of honor. He chose to die on his own terms. He chose to die with his love for Cleopatra in his heart. The story of Antony's end is a story of love and loss. It's a story of defeat and despair, but it's also a story of honor and courage. It's a story that shows how Antony was not just a general, but a man who knew how to love deeply and live bravely. After the defeat at Actium and Antony's tragic death, Cleopatra found herself alone. She was the queen of Egypt, but her kingdom was under threat. Octavian's forces were closing in, and she knew that her days were numbered. In these final days, Cleopatra showed her true strength. She refused to surrender. She refused to be paraded as a trophy through the streets of Rome. She refused to give Octavian the satisfaction of capturing her. She was a queen, and she would meet her end on her own terms. Cleopatra came up with a plan. She would not let herself be captured. She would not let herself be humiliated. Instead, she would choose her own fate. She decided to end her life. Legend tells us that she chose a noble and fitting end for a queen of Egypt. She had a small poisonous snake, an asp, brought to her in a basket of figs. She let the snake bite her, and the venom quickly took effect. When Octavian's soldiers found her, she was already gone. She was dressed in her royal robes, looking as majestic in death as she had in life. In her final act, she had managed to deny Octavian his victory. She had remained a queen until the very end. Cleopatra's final days are a testament to her strength and courage. Even in the face of certain defeat, she held on to her dignity. She chose her own destiny, and in doing so, she ensured that she would be remembered not as a defeated queen, but as a woman of power and determination. The story of Cleopatra's final days is a story of bravery and resilience. It's a story of a queen who faced her end with dignity and grace. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but a woman who knew how to shape her own destiny. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of Egypt. Her death marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the end of Egypt as an independent kingdom. But even though her rule ended, her legacy lived on. Cleopatra was not just a queen. She was a powerful leader, a skilled diplomat, a loving mother, and a symbol of resistance. Her impact on history is undeniable. Cleopatra is remembered for her intelligence and her charm. She was one of the few members of the Ptolemaic dynasty who could speak Egyptian. She was also fluent in 9 other languages. This skill helped her connect with different people and cultures. It made her a successful leader and diplomat. Cleopatra is also remembered for her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. These relationships were not just romantic. They were also political. They helped Cleopatra maintain her power and protect her kingdom. They show that Cleopatra was not just a queen, but also a strategic thinker. Cleopatra's death was a tragic end to her rule, but it was also a powerful statement. She chose to die rather than be captured. She chose to die with dignity. This decision shows Cleopatra's strength and courage. It shows her commitment to her people and her kingdom. Cleopatra's legacy extends beyond Egypt. She is a symbol of female power. She is a symbol of resistance. She is a symbol of independence. Her life and her rule have inspired books, movies, and artworks. Her story continues to captivate people around the world. Cleopatra's legacy is a testament to her life and her rule. It's a testament to her intelligence, her courage, and her determination. The story of Cleopatra's legacy is a story of a queen who left her mark on history. It's a story that shows how Cleopatra was not just a queen, but a woman who shaped her own destiny and the destiny of her kingdom.